Pillar to post and coast to coast, this is The Law.
Live Audio Wrestling.
Hello, wrestling fans. Dan the Mouth Lovranski here for Live Audio Wrestling and Fight Network, and I am here with a legendary wrestling figure, and we're in the Canadian Wartime Airplane Heritage Museum, and I get to talk to Eric Bischoff. How great is that? All right, so let's get into some wrestling talk here. I think I have to start with this, because especially since we're here in the Toronto area, and there was this, as Raw just got ready to do the big brand split, and they were going to name a general manager, you were scheduled for a show here in Toronto on the Sunday before the Monday, and at the last minute, something happened. It was canceled, so speculation was running wild that Eric Bischoff was going to be the GM on Raw. Did they ever approach you about it at all, Eric?
No, I never got one phone call, so it was just sheer coincidence. The promoters of the show at Destiny Wrestling called me about a week before the show and just told me that, you know, ticket sales were soft, and they asked me if they could reschedule the appearance, and I told them, sure, it's not a problem. So it was just sheer coincidence.
Okay, so that rumor's put to rest. Eric Bischoff was never asked, ladies and gentlemen. Now, let's talk about a brand split, though. How do you feel about that? Because they tried it once before. As a wrestling fan, I don't think it was very successful. What are your thoughts on kind of splitting it into two separate products?
Well, I understand the need to do it, simply because there's so much wrestling out there, and it's important to kind of distinguish the two brands and create a sense of competition between those two brands. Unfortunately, the first time, as you pointed out, and I was part of it, I was there during that time, and it didn't really work out. I don't think it achieved the goals that the WWE set out for it. And this time, I fear that we'll probably see much of the same, because it takes a long time and a lot of creative discipline to really make that brand split work. That you have to give the viewers a sense of stakes. There has to be a reason why those two brands exist. There has to be a reason why they're different. And there has to be a sense of competition between them. And that takes a long time. And it also requires that you don't have talent jumping back and forth right off the bat, which is what we're already seeing. So if WWE can find a creative way to maintain the discipline, the creative discipline, to keep the talent separate for a long enough period of time so that it matters when one jumps over from one organization or one brand to the other, then it will work. But if they start doing that kind of thing right off the bat, chances are it will dilute the idea pretty quickly.
Yeah. One of the things I thought, too, that was a bit of a problem was I thought SmackDown kind of got the short end of the stick. I got the impression that Raw was loaded to the gills, and then all the leftovers kind of went to SmackDown, and I think you need to have a more even balance.
Well, part of that is because Raw's a 3-hour show and SmackDown's a 2-hour show. So, you know, it just, by virtue of the sheer amount of content that has to be created for Raw, you're going to have a bigger, deeper roster. I don't really get the sense that it's lopsided in terms of the quality of the talent. I do recognize, however, that Raw is, you know, a 3-hour challenge, and SmackDown's a 2-hour challenge. It's a lot easier to do a 2-hour show than it is a 3-hour show.
Right. One of the things that we're seeing featured a lot now, we had the Cruiserweight Classic as part of the network, and now on Raw we're going to have the Cruiserweights. I want to get some of your thoughts on that, because really you were one of the first guys to really push Cruiserweights in Nitro. I mean, that was always my favorite, that first half hour of Nitro where we'd get the killer Cruiserweight match to kind of start the show off. So I wanted to get kind of your thoughts on the WWE kind of doing the same thing now.
Well, I'm thrilled to see it, number one. There's just a lot more talent out there that fall into that cruiserweight category. It's harder to find guys that are 6 foot, 6'2", 6'4", 250, 280, 300 pounds that can really move and have all the other characteristics and talent that it takes to be successful in the WWE. But when you open up the doors, so to speak, and you start including talent that is then in that 160, 170, 180, 190 pound weight class, all of a sudden now you've got a much larger pool of great talent to choose from. And the style of wrestling, for me, it's a little more dynamic, it's faster paced, they're able to do more athletic things than guys that are, again, 6'2", 6'5", 300 pounds can do. So I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it creates a lot more opportunity for the talent, and I think it creates a bigger variety of talent for the viewer.
Right. Right. Did you get to check out any of the Cruiserweight Classic? Because I thought that was some of the best wrestling I've seen on television in many, many years.
Yeah, I did watch some of it. I dropped in a couple times and checked it out and watched it online. And I agree with you. It's, like I said, it's very athletic. It is a little bit more wrestling oriented and less character driven. And that's a refresh. Look, I like them both. I love big characters. I love great story. But I also love the athleticism and the kind of fundamental wrestling entertainment that the Cruiserweights provide.
I think it's a great thing. I'm really happy that they finally come around because, like you said, Vince McMahon is known for being so stuck on guys that are 6'5" and 300 pounds. It's really refreshing to see that they finally kind of opened the door to that.
Well, I think the audience demanded it. Everything changes, everything evolves, and I think the audience pretty much dictated, what that opportunity was going to be, and Vince McMahon and company were smart enough to listen to the audience and evolve with it. So look, everybody wins. It's a great situation.
I also wanted to ask you a bit about NXT and this insane sort of developmental system they've featured. I mean, back when I was a young kid, you had the territories, and a guy could just travel North America and develop his craft. But now we have a specific institution and even a brand promotion that is for the younger talent. I just wanted to get your thoughts on NXT.
I think, again, it's a great thing for young talent. It's a great thing for the company to have that resource, that training pool, so to speak. My only concern with it is when you talk about the territory system, it enabled a guy to travel around the country and learn from different people and learn different styles and attempt different things and perfect that craft in front of a wide variety of audiences. With NXT, you're pretty much training in the WWE formula, in the WWE system. So the talent that comes out of NXT is pretty much, as they call it, Hulk Hogan refers to it as Titan training. You're coming out of that training system really, I don't want to say controlled, but your skill sets and your attributes are created by the formula that the WWE uses. So there's not a lot of diversity, and I'm not talking about racial or cultural or ethnic diversity, but in terms of style, there's not a lot of the diversity that comes out of there. So it'll be interesting to see how broadly they experiment with different styles and different presentations of wrestling, or if it becomes just another WWE filter or cookie cutter.
Do you think there's a danger of NXT actually eclipsing the main brand? Because it just seems to be such a hot product.
No, I don't think that will ever happen. But what I do suspect is going to happen is that Next will continue to grow. It'll continue to gain an audience because they're bringing up young, fresh guys that are, a lot of them out on the independent circuit who have already kind of sort of made a name for themselves. They're coming up through that NXT system. And it creates an anticipation with the viewers as to how long it's going to take for their favorite NXT star to make it to Raw or to make it to SmackDown. And I think that's brilliant. That's one of the things I really admire about what they're doing.
And it's certainly a challenge, too, to make sure that person can make the transition from NXT, because we've seen a couple that didn't work out. Tyler Breeze is the one that immediately comes to mind for me, but it's a very tricky situation to get that transition right.
It is, and look, making it to the big stage in WWE, whether it's Raw or SmackDown, it's akin to winning an Emmy, or an Academy Award. You've got to really be on your game to make it to that stage. So it's a challenge, and I applaud WWE for setting that system up and doing such a great job with it.
Now, someone that is on the main roster and has had a bit of a rough ride over the past year or so, and that's Roman Reigns. Ever since the breakup of the Shield, it's been hard for fans, it seems, to accept him as a character. I just thought some of your ideas on how maybe you would remedy that, or how do you see the presentation of Roman Reigns?
Well, I don't know Roman Reigns' character. I don't know him personally at all, and I don't know his character well enough to really be able to critique anything or add anything to it. I will say that, you've got to be a little bit careful as a producer. Sometimes you have an idea in your mind, you've got a plan on paper, and you have to be able to adapt to what the audience is looking for. And sometimes the WWE has been criticized in the past for, once they have a vision, damn it, they're going to stick to that vision and they're going to force it down the fan's throat. Whereas sometimes it may be better to listen to what that audience has to say, and rather than swimming upstream, kind of go with the currents a little bit more than they have with a guy like Roman Reigns. So it's a combination of Roman finding his character and getting his groove, which he will because he's a talented guy, and it's a little bit up to the creative side of WWE to kind of find that groove for him and go with the flow of the audience a little bit more than perhaps they have.
I always thought it was amazing in WCW when you guys brought in Bill Goldberg and he just got hot so fast, and you did exactly that. You got behind the guy and you pushed him to the moon, and I always thought that was such a great way to go about it. You listened to the fans. You paid attention, like, hey, they like this guy.
Yeah, I know that was an easy one. Okay, that was kind of a layup because the audience did react to him so strongly right off the bat. So it didn't take a lot of creative genius to jump on that train, so to speak. It was pretty obvious. But that is a good example, in some respects, of listening to the audience. And what was more interesting about Bill is because we brought him out really early. You know, the idea was to expose him to the audience, give him a couple wins while he was learning his craft, because he was only in wrestling for a very short period of time when we put him on television. And because he was so limited, you know, the only thing we could do creatively that made any sense was to just have him blow through people. And that coincidence kind of caught fire and created that undefeated streak, which created the character. So, again, it was, look, sometimes it's great to be good. Sometimes it's better to be lucky, and it's awesome when you're good and lucky, which is the case with Bill Goldberg and WCW.
That's awesome. Well, someone that did leave WWE and will probably not come back, had his debut in the UFC, that's CM Punk. I wanted to get some of your thoughts on that because that was a pretty unique situation, and I'm curious to see what's going to happen next after CM Punk getting, you know, basically obliterated in his first match.
Yeah, you know, I admire CM Punk for having the courage and the dedication to step into the ring. But, you know, I spent a long time as an amateur wrestler all through junior high school, and college. I wrestled AAU, freestyle, and Greco. So I have a respect for amateur wrestling. And I was also involved in martial arts for a long time and competed as a black belt in kickboxing in the late 70s and early 80s. So I understand the skill sets that are required to participate in the UFC, although I never participated in MMA. That's a whole different thing altogether. But, you know, guys that are amateur wrestlers, a guy like Brock Lesnar, for example, or Dolph Ziggler is another, you know, amateur wrestler who excelled. Bobby Lashley, three-time, you know, collegiate wrestling champion. These are guys that probably started wrestling when they were 7, 8, 9 years old. You know, a lot of kids that come up in amateur wrestling that reach that collegiate level, they start wrestling once they take the training wheels off their bicycles. You know, they're learning how to wrestle. Same is true with martial arts. A lot of great martial artists, whether it's jiu-jitsu or karate or judo, you know, when you develop a skill set at that level to compete in the MMA or in the UFC, chances are you've been practicing that martial art for decades. And it's just not a skill set you can teach somebody in a year or two, and not to be able to compete at that level, at least. So I admire CM Punk for trying it, but I'm not sure we'll see him again in an MMA ring. I hope we do. I hope he sticks with it just because of his commitment to it, but it's going to be a tough road.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see what the next step is for Punk as well. Does UFC let him go to a smaller organization to develop, or do they keep him under their wing and just give him the time that he needs?
I would hope that they let him fight in smaller organizations and fight people that are a little bit more closely aligned with him in terms of experience and skill sets, and give him a chance to develop not only his skill sets but his confidence in the ring. Because if they throw him back into the UFC again and they put him in there with somebody that's got a couple years of experience in MMA, who was it? You know, somebody said, you know, the definition of crazy is doing the same things over and over again and expecting a different result. And I think it would fall into that category.
That's true. Now, this is great. Thanks so much for talking to us, Eric. I want to ask just a couple things about the WCW days. You know, it's been, almost 15 years now since I think WCW closed down. And I just wanted to see, looking back now over the whole experience and that, how do you look back on that fondly? How do you look back on that whole because that was a whirlwind period and a big period for pro wrestling.
Well, you know, we're here at a Comic-Con and outside of Toronto, Canada, and I've got people coming up to the table all day long sharing their WCW memories, wearing NWO shirts to this day that are still being marketed by WWE, as a matter of fact.
That's right, yeah.
So, you know, to know that I had that much of an impression on the wrestling audience, it makes me feel good. I look back at it fondly. I was very, I'm grateful for the opportunity that I had, and I look back on it with nothing but great memories.
Does it bother you sometimes certain wrestling fans kind of like to point the finger at you and say, that's it, Eric Bischoff, he just ran the ship into the ground and he killed WCW? I mean, that book, The Death of WCW, things like that. Does that bother you, or you just brush it off?
You know, it used to bother me more than it does now, but the truth is, people that take that attitude are ignorant, and I don't mean that in the derisive sense, I mean it in the literal sense. They just don't know, they don't understand, they weren't there, and they're kind of repeating the narrative that's been out there on the internet for so long that was really generated by people that either had an agenda or just didn't really understand the dynamics of what was going on at WCW at the time. So, you know, as time has gone by, I just look at it and I laugh, or if I hear it, I chuckle, but it doesn't bother me.
Is there a high point for you? Is there anything that you look back and go, man, like that was just amazing?
You know, I think in totality, the fact that, I hate to say this about myself because I don't like putting myself over, but you know, we changed the wrestling business. The fact that there's a 3-hour live Monday Night Raw, I did that. The fact that there's a Cruiserweight division on Monday Night Raw, I did that. The fact that there's reality built into the storylines as opposed to it all being cartoon characters and kind of animated presentation, I did that. So there's so much of what we see to this day in WWE that, look, I know where it came from. I know where it started. So that makes me feel good.
Absolutely. Just to finish up here, can you let the fans in on some of the stuff you're doing now? Because we don't see you in wrestling anymore. I know you're involved in a lot of different TV productions and different projects, but give us a little tour through the current world of Eric Bischoff.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting tour. You know, my core business I have with my business partner, Jason Hervey. We have Bischoff Hervey Entertainment. We've had it since 2003. We produce television shows and series for just about every major domestic U.S. Cable outlet and one network, NBC. We've been doing that for a long time. We've been very successful, and we continue to produce shows. We've got one now that we're working with. I'm not allowed to say the name of the show or the network. The networks like to break that news, and they don't like it when the producers do it. But we'll probably see it on air this fall that we're very, very proud of. It's more of a documentary series as opposed to the standard type of reality shows we've done in the past. You know, we did a sitcom with Scott Baio that we did for 60 episodes. We own a gaming company together. We have got a small brewing project that we do that we've been having fun with. Yeah, Buffalo Bill Cody beer. If you get to Wyoming, check us out. So we've got a lot of different things going on. I've got a podcast that I'm doing now once a week, Bischoff on Wrestling. It's on iTunes and audioboom.com. That's a lot of fun for me because it gives me a chance to kind of jump back into the current state of affairs in wrestling and talk about the business of professional wrestling in a way that other podcasters don't do or are unable to do. So all of those things keep me pretty busy and keep me stimulated.
Well, Eric, thanks so much for talking with us. It was a pleasure to meet you, and continued success with whatever falls on your plate.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you guys.